And we are live as I go throwing my camera around. But anyway, Kaiser, this evening, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing excellent. I'm very excited to get into this topic. I think it's a very interesting one, and it's one that I really wanted to get into you because it's actually an idea that I don't have fully fleshed out, which is that just covering different ethnic groups and particularly what nations resonate with what particular forms of art. Now, throughout like Western civilization, for example, pretty much every different group has these different expressions. For example, the English have phenomenal painters and writers and various artists of different stripes. You have film that's emerged in recent years as another form of art. There's all of these things. However, I think that there are specific groups in which they produce certain types of art better than others. And I think that there's something to be said about that and how that then ties into them as a people, how you understand them. It also comes from very interestingly. Have you ever read the Thrawn series of Star Wars? It's something that
No.
okay. Well, I can
Is
explain.
this EU?
Yeah, it's one of the original expanded universe sets. It's probably
Okay.
the best stuff that ever came out of the expanded universe for Star Wars. It's actually in a lot of ways.
Dude, that,
Oh yeah,
that
go.
is going back. I feel like the only one I ever read was Shadows of the Empire and then maybe a couple other ones.
Oh, Shadows of the Empire might have actually been one of them. Let me see. Really? Oh, the video game?
Yeah, that was a book.
Oh, it was a book as well. Oh, okay.
Hmm.
Yeah. No, this one in particular is a trilogy of novels that came out, I believe, in the 90s that just covered here's like the story after. That would have been far better than the horrific sequel trilogy that we got in reality. And so this particular series and why I'm bringing it up, there's a really interesting thing that this character Thrawn, who is the main antagonist, does, which is that he studies a group's art in order to understand them as a people and then understand how to defeat them. And it's different specific species, it's different specific governments and groups. He studies what art they make in order to then draw out all of these things that are around them. And it's something that I read as a
This is
young
a plot
lad.
point in one of the
Yeah.
books.
No, this is like him as a character is one of
That's
the
a lot of
things.
fun.
No, it's really fun, and this is a really well written series. Like, I don't like Star Wars that much anymore. I think it's very kind of like it. Of course, it's classic, and there's a hero's journey to it, and all these things. It's really hard to go against the original trilogy. Even the sequels were great in their own right, in some
Well,
regards.
so much of, unfortunately, so much of the stuff that did have merit and did have a heart to it was just hollowed out as the boomer generation got older. And I hate to opening salvo. The boomers are so bad. That's not quite what I'm saying, but there is a list of IPs that just, man, got squished under this idea of how much money can we squeeze out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's something else that we can get into later if you'd like. But in this particular aspect of that book, that was one of the things that they covered, which also shows that this is an interesting and elevated book series that actually had a lot of complexity to it. But that was the particular aspect of that one character. And it was something that I think actually has a lot of merit and truth to it, where you actually can draw these out. And for example, I guess we could get into that. I think the easiest one in particular, as a specific example, would be looking at what art the Germans have most excelled at. And I believe that that would be their music. I think that they have made they have had some of the greatest composers of all time come from Germany. You have Bach and Beethoven and all of these other guys who are Germans, and they just have excelled at it. But another interesting thing that the Germans also excel at is chemistry. They are some of the best chemists, some of the best. They're also some of the best engineers. They're really good at these very particular orderly things. They're great at mechanics. They're great at building cars, at building all of these
See,
things.
now I'm going to step in it and say I think the Germans are great warriors.
They are also great warriors, and war is its own form of art. But not quite what I'm getting at with this. And it's interesting too, because if you do bring in like the methods of war, I think that you actually also see this tie-in where the Germans were great at building a very particular ordered military force, that they were very good at drilling, at planning these things, at running war games. Like those were some of the things that they pioneered very well at logistics, at like the Blitzkrieg is a perfect example
Yeah.
of this. It's these different units working in a combined arms force all together to concentrate and to build towards one specific objective. All of that, I think, ties into what art they have.
So, and I didn't mean to jump the gun on this, but as you're talking and as I'm thinking, and then specifically the Germans, to give the butcher his due, uh, yeah, it's interesting, this idea of weakness that can accompany it. Are you? And I'm just sort of going on your background here. I'm wondering if you're familiar. Are you familiar with the idea of the German tank versus the American tank?
Are you talking about how the German tank was extremely solid and was just very well machined and was overall one-to-one a better tank, whereas the American tank was just simply far easier to manufacture en masse?
Yeah, basically. And so the idea being that yes, German tanks were great until they weren't. Until you lost a piece that couldn't be fabricated, until there was no bubble gum to hold anything together, because you couldn't with a German tank. Whereas it was much easier to fabricate and keep American tanks moving in the field. And so it's, which poison do you want to deal with?
Yeah, and that definitely seems to also fit pretty well where it's like, yeah, Germans are great at building this one particular machine, but not as good with the replacement parts and the other things. Yeah, no, I think that fits quite well, actually.
Yeah, so that is it. It's still wild to me that a book written for teens and young adults was getting into this concept.
Yeah, no, it really is a very solid book, and it handles like the political complexities in this book pretty well. Like
Mhm.
the whole thing is putting the empire on the back foot, where you have this kind of shattered remnant of it that's dealing with the like Thrawn is essentially the guy who's taken over the empire. He's the heir to it. He's not a Jedi. He's not any of these things. He was simply an admiral that just so happened to be able to have the most coherent fleet and organization left to him when everything got destroyed. It also dives really interestingly into like, okay, so the rebellion won. Now let's actually explore what it's like to try and build their democracy out of this empire and all the issues that they
Yes.
have handling this. Something that the sequels completely overlooked and decided we're not even going to bother with that. We're actually just going to detonate their government and not
Mhm.
explore it at all and just go back to being rebels. Like this one put it on the other side where it's okay. The good guys are actually the dominant force. The bad guys are the underdog. The bad guys don't have any of these special things to them. It's literally just a genius admiral trying to like handle this situation where he's now on the back foot.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking too. It brings in an interesting component because we're moving off into the martial aspect of it, but we did a stream not too long ago. I don't know, a month, maybe a couple months ago, where we were talking about what it is to be a nation and what the biospirit is, and one of the ideas along with that was this idea of narrative. And a nation needs a story. It needs a particular narrative that it can see itself in and also continue. And so when you understand what your people's art is, or how you engage in all forms of art, whether it's music, whether it's painting, sculpture, who your heroes are and how they're portrayed, I think is important. And so we talked a little bit about the Germans. Um, let's go a little bit further afield and get out of the granularity of Europe, because I want what it is I want to come back to Europe, and I think that's sort of the high point, because we're Europeans, so it is what it is. Excuse me, we're ethnically, well, see, even that gets sticky. I was going to say ethnically European, but that's not true. We're ethnically Americans,
A hundred
but
percent.
there's a European base there, a European understanding, and so I want to come back to that and hit that. And frankly, um, potentially compare that to Americanism, so to
I would
speak.
like to touch on Americans last, particularly because of
Right.
that. And if you want to touch on something that's more base, we could touch on what is the general global South's form of art that
So
they.
and that might be more along because I was going to throw up Japan or so. I just right now I'm looking for a big contrast. If we have Europe and America, and we'll dig into that and see the subtle movements and divergences there towards the end. But right now, what are two cultures that we could say there's a difference here in the way that they are approaching music and the way they're approaching the visual nature of art?
How about sub-Saharan Africa?
Okay.
So sub-Saharan Africa, I think their clearest form of like what their art is dance. No, they're
Okay.
certainly like musically inclined as well. But I would argue that the music is largely just there to facilitate the dance. There's going to be, overlap between different arts, but you have to look at what originates these things. What is everything else deriving from? What exists to facilitate the other? To touch just a little bit more on Europe, for example, the easiest comparison between that would be, well, you have Richard Wagner's, Gotterdammerung, the Ring trilogy, the cycle of these things. It's one of the greatest epics, but its base is music. That everything else is tied into the music. The music is what is the most important aspect of it, and so it ties into the Germans, even though they're making this beautiful epic drama. The music is still what is the focus. In the
Mhm.
contrast to that, when you look at, for example, like Africans, and even I would also argue much of just generally the global South, much of South America as well, um, it is dance. And if you look at like South American music on its own, or like how Mexican music or these other things, a lot of it is just to facilitate dance. It's very like you will realize this if you listen to it, but if you're going to like a Mexican restaurant, for example, what you're going to get in their music is just this very simple drum beat constantly that just goes boom, chaboom, chi boom, chaboom. And that is literally almost every song is just that. But it's all to facilitate this beat that you dance to. If you look at Bad Bunny, if you look at all these things, it's just dance. That is the main purpose of it. It is to get rhythm. And same with Africans. And what I would argue is that the reason why dance and why this ties into them, why they care so much about dancing is kind of the most base form of any kind of artistic work. It doesn't actually have that much in deliberate meaning to it, although we can get into some of the Europeans
I
who
was
do
about to
have a lot
say
of meaning.
Owen Barfield might have.
Yes, we can get into there are some specific European groups that do actually have dance as well as their main art, and we can contrast that with them. That would actually be one of the best ones to hop into after. But their dance is mostly just about fast motion. It's different motions, it's different movements, it's these things. It's a very like basal thing. It's about flashiness or these different movements being portrayed. It doesn't actually speak a ton that is very coherent or that you could articulate very well. It's kind of just moving around in interesting ways, and that even is reflected, I would say, like if you look at, for example, African religion, like even when they adopt Christianity, what does every black church have? Almost, it's they like to dance during church. They like to worship God through dance. And I would even argue that there's not anything necessarily wrong with that. David
Right.
danced before the Lord. It's how these people do. It's their art, it's their expression. It's not something I would do. I don't find that, but I'm also not African. And so if they're going to do these things, if this is their form of expression, that is simply how they are.
Well, in a quick timeout, and I don't want to get too loose on this, but I do think when we can step back for a second in regards to Christianity, and the Apostle Paul tells us not to argue over disputable matters. These are not matters of doctrine that we're talking about necessarily. On the face of it, these aren't issues with doctrine. We're just talking about how a nation and how a people interacts with the gospel. And we've said before, and I just want to hit it again for those listening for the first time or whatever, that it makes sense if we grant the premise that we grew up in different areas in different times and with a different cultural and ethnic understanding of what life was and how to operate with it, because it's very simply put, a man who knows that winter is coming is going to operate differently in his landscape than a guy who says, I never see winter, but I do see cobras. So the cobra and winter are two very different things that people are concerned about. And so they adapt to that. And it makes sense then that when the gospel is brought into these people, that they will have a different understanding is the wrong word, but they will interact uniquely with the gospel. And so the gospel stays the same, but the way in which it is approached and see, again, I'm back to understood, and that's a very bad word for what I'm trying
Could
to
I try?
express. Go for it.
So what I view this as and how I relate to this topic is that there is an objective truth. There is,
Yeah.
this objective morality. There's this thing. However, we as human beings are finite in our understanding, and different nations are simply going to have different ways of interacting and viewing the world itself. We're all have different levels of perception and understanding, and that's simply just going to be a thing. If you acknowledge that nations are fundamentally different, that they are fundamentally going to interact with the world different and produce different results, they're also going to interact with objective truth differently. It's not that these things are different because of them. It's not a declaration that everything is subjective, but it is an understanding that the way in which you understand this is going to change depending on the nation. Different nations are going to have different
Right.
you know ways of
Well, and we
interacting.
see this already in the New Testament. The Apostle Paul will interact differently with Greeks than he does with Jews. There are books written to the Gentiles. There are books written to the Jews, and they can be edifying to both. But Matthew is answering questions for a Jewish audience that his Gentiles couldn't really care less about.
Yeah, and Luke is writing in the same
Yes.
style as a Roman biographer would. He adopts this, and I think in particular, like, it is a really beautiful work that he makes, because he is essentially trying, like, what I would imagine occurred when Luke was writing the gospel is that Mark, I believe, came first. But
Yeah.
Mark is written in the most simple terms possible in
Hmm.
order to get things across. Like, it's not objectively, it is not the most well written work that there is. It's and then and then and then and then is constantly throughout it. And what Luke writes is something that would have been at the standard of, if you were writing a biography of the emperor, you would have written how Luke wrote. You would have done all the justifications that Luke gives, where he explains that this because this happened, and this is where we went, and then these things happened. Like, he gives all of
Right.
these. It is a very well written work.
So, oof, and I don't want to get too far down on this, but when we look at the Gospels, I do think that there were, and I'm putting words and ideas here that could have been. This is not doctrine. I'm not saying this is how things went, but in my mind, Paul and Peter and the apostles, they are going out and they're like, blah. We are the church and we got to build the church. We got to focus on it. Movement, action, action. And Mark comes up and he's like, we should probably annotate some of this. We should. It might also be worthwhile for us to build a letter that we can send out to the churches that are forming, so that they understand what had gone on. And so when you look at that, and then when you look then at Matthew, then at Luke, and then finally into John, one of the other things that you can see is that the problems, quote unquote, the problems, the issues that are arising within the church are being answered subsequently by these gospels. Matthew throws his gospel out there, and this is like, okay, from a Jewish perspective, here is what we are seeing. Here is how Jesus Christ is meeting the expectations of the Messiah. And then, like you said with Luke, this is, hey, for you Gentiles, this is what we saw. This is how we know that this was going on. Ultimately, into John writing, and this is how we see Christ, the Son of God.
Yes, John is the ultimate summation, I would argue, in the
Right.
composition of all these things. And Luke, just to hit on him a bit more, because that is my personal favorite gospel, he's also writing to an audience that is I would argue it's to prove that this is not something that is simply for, the lower classes, the
I thought you
downtrodden.
were going to go with the professional aspect.
It is a very professionally written. It shows that this is something that is for people who like that you can this is for everyone. This is for people who have an elevated understanding that you can actually hold to these things and you can understand these things even when you are a professional, even when you are of this class. So it not only hits the Gentiles, but it's proving that this can actually be an incredibly intelligent thing too, and that the intelligent can actually resonate with it, because he goes to great lengths to show, hey, here is the actual reasoning, and here's how I can display that these things actually occurred and actually happened. Here's me giving a proper account to the standard that would have been there of the day. Again, it was literally at the level of which, if you were writing a biography of Trajan, you would have written the same way that he wrote.
Perfect. Yeah, and so that's just sort of laying the groundwork there for us to say that all the nations are interacting with the world in a particular way. They're interacting with creation in a particular way. And that informs how they come to the gospel. So I think we've done a pretty good job, I think, of explaining that idea. And so if we could circle back to you were talking about dance and hitting on how that is sort of the emphasis of the global South in particular. And so now I'm going to ask you to go into the dark and pontificate. Why do you think that is? What's coming up? What is being expressed in that idea of dance? And
I would art
I'm trying to think who would be a good representative of this. I can't think of anybody off the top of the head.
I mean, I think generally, like, that's just I think it's very clear that that is what they care the most about. I think that it's pretty
Mhm.
clear. We don't need to get into who the greatest African dancer is, but,
Oh, no, 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 I'm sorry. I meant who could be on a stream and
explain
articulate why
dance.
this is. Yeah,
Uh
and its emphasis within the global South. I
Yeah,
don't know. Maybe that'd be a
I
question
don't
for
know. I
Dutton or
don't
somebody.
interact too much with people from the global south. This is me simply observing these things. I mean, I've
Sure.
spent a good amount of time. I spent a good amount of time in South Africa, for example, and this was certainly something that I saw. Like, they, even when they're like singing songs or doing any of the things, they dance
Mm.
while they sing. They dance while they do these things. Like, it's all it seems like it's very clear that this is their main form of art. I don't even think that they would contest with that that is what they care the most about. That's what they go into. And I think also, in a large way, like, it's very emotive. It's very
Yes.
emotionally driven. It's about feeling, feeling the rhythm. It's a very instinctual thing.
Uh, Tell me if this is a fair way to frame it. It seems to me that it's less conceptual, it's less focused on the idea than it is focused on participation.
Yes, I would completely agree. It's also about being in the moment.
Yeah.
It's this is the moment. I'm going to dance. I'm living in this particular time. I'm going to express myself at this particular at instance. It is not as much about, I want to express this very particular idea. It's, here is how I feel right now in regard to that. And I think, again, just, I don't want to rabbit hole back down to worship, but I think that's also very clearly tied into how they do. This is how I feel. I feel very happy. I want to express my joy with the Lord or with these different things, and so I'm going to dance. It is much less about rumination on the particular aspects of the gospel or of these things, or getting into, deeper theology. They like to
Right.
have that more emotional connection. And I don't actually think that there's anything wrong with that. I think oftentimes we can
Mhm.
project onto them, well, why aren't they doing what we do? Like, you can get this with, for example, like, many of the
Where's
reform.
their
Yeah.
Westminster Confession?
Yes,
Where's their Book
exactly.
of Concord?
Well,
Yeah.
they're simply not a people that would create the Westminster Confession or relate in that way. They're very much
Yeah.
going to relate to it in this moment. I feel this joy, and I feel this joy for the Lord. They're they're very childlike, you could say, in many regards, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. Christ calls the little children to come to him and to be with him, and a child can't articulate the Westminster Confession quite often. There are certainly some who can, but many, especially younger, don't understand that. And I think that's something that many people get a hang up on in that regard too, where they kind of see it as, well, this is how I relate to these things. This is how I understand these things. And sometimes that can even lead people to say, well, they're not actually even capable of relating to God that way. And I think that they're wrong, because I think a child, in the same way that even an infant, you can see love for their father and for their family in them. I think even then, like, if an infant can, if you can even say that, someone who's developmentally disabled can, I think also other peoples that might be less developed can also have that. They're just going to express it very differently than you do, because they're not the same group of people that you are. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah, that that sounds good to me. It sounds feasible, and it mm, once once you allow yourself to move beyond a strict tabula rasa, I think it allows two things. It allows people to be better understood as they are, and then it shows the fullness of the gospel, and that it is a universal message that can be understand in a national and ethnic sense.
No, I completely agree. And if we want to tie more back into the topic at hand, do you want to explore anything else that's outside of Europe first?
So I am super curious, because you've given this idea more thought than I, and you've looked at different areas of the world. Just one that comes to mind: uh, the tribal nations that were on the continent of North America. Was there what Are you aware of an artistic framework or an
Yes.
artistic thrust? Okay.
Yeah, actually, I would say that they were much less about dance, and this is
Hmm.
also very interesting, but I would say that they were much more about carving, sculpture, and pottery, and it reflects in their worship as well. I mean, the easiest one is, for example, totems that they would build
Yes.
and make. They would craft their spears. They would, do intricate designs. This is something that even Jefferson writes about in Notes on the State of Virginia. He talks about how they are very artistic in this regard. I think that they made some interesting pottery, interesting works. They would like to carve designs. They were much more of that type of people. And I think it actually also reflects where they actually came from as well, because they are ultimately an Asiatic people. They're
Hmm.
Mongoloid in origin, if you wanted to go with that term. But they came across the sea, and that's also reflective of a lot of those people. I would also argue that the Chinese are very similar, where theirs is in, jade, it's in pottery, it's in ivory, it's in, all of these things are where the Chinese in particular, that is
Yeah.
their form of art. It is in carving out particular pieces. And now the interesting part of them is that it also mostly ties into things that actually have use. So for example, like, what do we, fine china, we literally call it china, but it is plateware, it is potteryware, it is things that serve a purpose but are also made beautiful. I think the tribes here also did the same thing, where they would make beautiful works and arts that were attached to things that had also direct purpose to them.
Okay. Yeah, and so for everybody that's listening, I want you to hear what's being said. It's not that this group of people was doing dance, and so this other group of people never did dance. It's We're just trying to tease out what was the thrust of what was going on, what was the emphasis. So the Germans that Actually, the Germans definitely have dance, because there's various beer dances and whatever. But that doesn't mean that dance was the emphasis. That wasn't the main thrust. And it does go even deeper than that, because if you look at something like a totem, it is this question of, is the totem future looking, meaning that they're expecting the totem to enhance and affect the future that's being chased? Or is it more backwards, looking into the past, saying, because we have, because this totem has been here in the midst of this, now we can expect this? And sometimes that line isn't clear, but when you jump into a people's art and a nation's art, if you are looking at it correctly, you will ultimately be seeing the expression of who they are and what that culture's worldview is, and how that's both pushing them into the art, but simultaneously being expressed, remembered, participated in their art.
Yeah, these are also their main ones. This is what they
Right.
excel the most at. Again, all groups of people generally will get into all forms of art, but it's also where the best ones are out of them and what their main focus is. So again, like Native Americans, all or Indians, as I like to say, just to distinguish them from Indians. They liked, like for example, like they like jewelry a lot. Like they make these beautiful sets of jewelry that are still sold to this day as like Indian jewelry, Indian pottery, baskets. These things seem to be their main expression in terms of their art. Now, at the same time, like they have storytelling. They had oral stories that they would also tell. They had dances that they would also do, and the same could
Right.
be said of Europeans. Europeans generally have all these forms too as well. And you hit on this
Yes.
perfectly. There are beer hall dances. There are German authors that are great. There are all of these things, but what they were the best at or what they focused the most on does actually matter because it says a particular thing about this group of people.
Perfect. Okay, so yeah, the North American one, that very cool. So it's the focus on what's being built and how it's used, and then you tied that back to Asia. Um, all right. So conceptually, before we start moving back to Europe and getting into that, where is sort of the delineation between art and that which is simply functional? And that, does that make sense, or is that too muddy a question?
I'm a little muddied on that, to be
Sure.
honest.
Okay. So do we do we look at the fork as a piece of art, or do we look at it as something that is functional and it's accomplishing a utility, and then art gets pressed onto it? And so for me, I'm trying to delineate between, because I thought the points you were making with pottery was very interesting, but it's like, why wouldn't they just make a flat piece of pottery? What is it they're trying to imbue in pottery when they make it in the shape of a certain totem, a certain animal? It's so
If I
unf-
could,
uh-huh.
because I think I'm cooking on this now. I think that the tie to that in particular is the tie that they have to their way of life and what was going on with them. They were even the natives for or yeah, the original inhabitants, I guess you could say, of the Americas were very tied to the land, tied to these things, tied to the bottom level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I would say.
Hmm.
And so like putting effort into those things that are then tied into your own survival and putting art into that, like we respect the animal that we kill and for our own food or whatever, all these different things and tying into that. I think that that ties into where they were as a civilization as well. I could say a little less for China. Um, I mean, I would also say that their art differs from because there's like the fine china and putting artistic things to this was also mostly for their elevated classes, their upper classes, to consume or to use or to export. So maybe there's a tie into that. All of this is stuff that I really just wanted to talk with you because I think we resonate pretty well on these levels, and so you could help me flesh this out. If I could deviate slightly, I think that there is
Please.
one.
Yep.
Yeah, there's one standout in Asia that does not tie into this in the same way. And I actually
Ooh.
think
Okay.
yeah. So the Japanese, who are very
Okay.
highly regarded for anime, for example. However, what few people recognize,
Your PFP says otherwise.
yes, they are highly regarded for it. However, my PFP actually does say otherwise because anime is not their base form of art.
Yeah.
Anime almost always is an adaptation of something else. My profile in particular, is tied to Legend of the Galactic Heroes, which I think is one of the better politically driven works of all time that will tell you so much about how governments function, how people function, how history works. It's an incredible expose on great man theory, just displayed through this show. I recommend it highly to almost everyone. But it started from a novel series, and Japan in particular.
Oh, not even a manga?
Nope, not a manga. It was, and
No
mangas
kidding.
themselves, yeah, mangas themselves are oftentimes they come from what are called light novels. And
Okay.
so that's the original form that many animes also come from is light novels. They will write these novels that
Is this like
are
a Japanese form of pulp?
kind of, yeah. It's like
Okay.
we built this in the hopes that this then turns into an anime. But even before all of these things came out, or manga came out, or all these other things, theirs is a very literary form of art. Even calligraphy is like a beautiful way of making their art, but it's written. Calligraphy is about taking letters and making letters beautiful to add on to an artistic value to these different symbols that they're writing, essentially that communicate something, but also making the symbols themselves quite beautiful. They write many different novels, many different books. If you spend time in Japan, which I have, you will constantly see people, reading books on the trains. They will have these tiny little books that they read. However, what makes them very interesting and distinct, and you can also see this in haikus, which are another form of their art that they excel at. Now they have, the great paintings as well. They have some very really interesting ones if you want to see them. Just to tangent a bit of Admiral Perry and how they painted Admiral Perry when he first arrived in Japan. That communicates a lot, but the literature is actually, I would say, the main form of art for Japan. It's also very interestingly what I would say is the main form of art for Anglo peoples. They focus on literature the most, but the main distinction that you see, and what I would say, because there are a lot of similarities between the Japanese and the English. They're both island people. They're both seafaring. They both have this very interesting relation to the continent, where they see themselves as separate from the continental peoples. They have this, heritage of, a warrior culture and all of these things to them. Yeah, no, the art of Admiral Perry is fascinating. I quite enjoy it, but that is how they saw him in those different depictions of him. That is them trying to draw an American man. But and this is again a good example. They excel at making this, but even in the pictures they write, they add words to it. There's a little note to it that they add, because I would argue that that's their focus. Again, in the same way that we can explain the Anglos after this, but their focus is literature. The big difference that you will find in Japanese literature and Japanese writing versus the Anglo people is they are extremely dedicated to the form of it, that it has to fit a certain number of characters. That's the same with haikus. It's this many syllables and this many syllables and this many syllables, and you don't break from that. Their novels, very interestingly, are the same way, where novels will actually be at this very set standard. If you go to a Japanese bookstore, you will see that almost every novel that they sell is in the identical size to every other novel. They are in these very specific sets of these books where they are almost identical in terms of how many characters are in this book. Now it's going to deviate slightly, but they're always in these like small packaged forms. Where, for example, like my book, the thing that I named myself after is 10 separate books. And each book is about the exact same length of this novel. But what they won't do is do something like Lord of the Rings, where Lord of the Rings is this massive story that is 3 books all in one, sold as one book. They're not ever going to do something like that. They're going to set to a specific form again and again, because I think they are also a more collectivist people. They like to cohere to these very specific ideas and these very specific things. They do have a level of individualism to them, much more so than I'd say most of Asia, but they still have that same Asian tendency towards collectivism, towards fitting this particular form,
The
even as they
tall
do so.
poppy idea.
The tall, what is that? Explain.
Tall poppy. The idea that the taller the poppy, the more likely it is to get cut down
Yes,
first.
exactly. And so they will, and it's interesting too. Like their idea is like you can make you can have a very beautiful poppy, but it ought to be the same size as the others. It should be the same form that the others hold. It's a really fascinating thing to them. Even like their shows will generally comport to that as well, where they will
Yeah.
be identical sizes, and they don't tend to deviate from size length.
That, a quick jump into a pool or whatever. I've always found bonsai trees just very curious.
Yeah, no, that's actually a great example.
Yeah, because
Where
it is this pruning in order to bring out the most beautiful, the most majestic operation, and yet uh, there is still a particular size and a particular dimension that's expected.
yeah, absolutely. It's a perfect example. I think that you see this reflected through much of their art. Mangas are the same way. Anime is
Yeah.
mostly the same way, where you are always going to mostly get 22 minutes an episode. It's always going to
Mm.
stay that length. Whereas like American shows, you can sometimes be 22 minutes, you can be 40 minutes. They're very focused on maintaining a particular form while changing the expression of that. Versus
Okay.
I would say the Anglo, if we want to get into that, theirs is also literary. And I'm still working out exactly what that says about the Anglo people, why they
Hmm.
hold to literary, why you see this parallel with the English, with the Japanese between the English. But
Hmm.
theirs is also very literary, but it's much more free flowing in terms of size. Again, you can have like very long or very short stories, and you can sell them in these particular formats. You have a much more free flowing form to what is written, versus what you would see out of the Japanese, who are very particular about maintaining that same form between works. I think that it does certainly, at a minimum, speak to the individualism that you see inherent to English people. And I think even seeing that helps a lot, because I think it's very easy to recognize on the right that individualism is far too overblown. However,
Right.
I think that it is within the English character and the Anglo character to care more about the individual than it is for almost any other people in existence. I think that you see
Mm.
this reflected in their laws. I think you see this reflected in
Yes.
how they build homes, how they do all of their things that they do are going to be much more individualistically focused on recognizing the individual. It's a flaw, but it's also a benefit, and it's also something that I think is inherent to Anglo people.
Yeah. So it's a curious thing, and for me, and I don't want to get over my skis on here. It I need to frankly learn more about um, the Germanic the Germanic expression of Europeanism in contrast to the Celtic expression of Europeanism. Uh, yeah, to see how all that works out. And I mean, frankly, it's a hole that we can go down very deeply, because then what's the difference between the Welsh and the Britons? What's the difference between the Scots and the Irish? And of course, these people would recognize themselves as having differences, and so then when the Germanics, who have their own differences amongst themselves, come in, uh, it's interesting how a personhood in a nation like Britain, like the English, can appear within that.
Yeah, I agree. And there's an interesting thing where it's really hard for me to tell what exactly the specific art that is reflected through Celtic people is. And I'm
Mm,
between literary and music on them. So, for
okay.
example, Irish, their flag is a harp. It is a musical instrument. Clearly, they resonate with
Yes.
that. However, they also resonate heavily with literary works. Same with the Welsh. There's an excellent one of my favorite works of the Welsh is the Four Branches of the Mabinogi, which is this ancient medieval just set of their tales and their stories. It's incredibly interesting, very worth a read. I don't need to rabbit hole into that. The Scots are another fascinating one because when most
Well,
people think,
maybe I'm way off base here, but didn't the Arthurian legend start
yes,
as
yeah,
a
they were
Welsh
also
legend?
Welsh. Yes, it is also a
That's what I.
Welsh legend. Yep. So they have these legends, they have these tales, but they're also very musical people. The Scots as well, bagpipes, very easy to associate with the Scots. But the Scots
Mm,
also have some of the greatest philosophers and historians to their people, I would also argue. You have this incredible group of people that have come out. I mean, like the Scottish Enlightenment is its own enlightenment period, and you have this
yeah.
incredible group of people that come out of that that are very intelligent, very well thinking. You have my favorite historian is Scottish, who is Thomas Carlyle. So they're very clearly good at this, but they're also very good at music. It's hard to really say with them in particular what is their form, and it's one that I could not give you an answer on. I can't say what their exact one
Yeah.
is.
Well, okay. So point noted on the Celtic framing. Yeah, that's curious. Even as you're saying it, though, I'm thinking there there was a difference in Reformed thought. Well, that it's easier to delineate when we're talking about Reformed thought than we are within Catholic thought. But certainly there were these examples of the scholasticism of the UK and of Western Europe in comparison to Italian Europe and the various Mediterranean areas that were producing Catholic thought for much of the time. There's still sort of this different emphasis, but the easy one for our Protestant guys, I'm thinking, is you have continental Reform thought, you have Calvin doing his writings, and then ultimately you would get Calvin's institutes, but they weren't binding per se on any church. It was just like these are ideas. And so on the continent, you get the three forms of unity within Reform thought. And it's a very small body of work in comparison to the Westminster standards, which is your larger catechism, your shorter catechism, your confession of faith that they were producing over in the UK. And then the Baptists also produced a confession of faith. The Lutherans, they had the Book of Concord and they had Luther's smaller catechism. And I think there's some other writings that I might be forgetting in there. But still, it's a different. They've all sort of got a different vibe, both in the length of how they're doing things, as well as in the questions that are being addressed and how they're being addressed. It's just a curious thing. I'm not giving any hard answers here. I just think it's interesting that in these people groups you're seeing, like you were talking about, the over in the UK, you're seeing this focus on what is the story, what this Anglo expression of a literary idea and a willingness to just pour ink out on this. And then there's also a German idea that's kind of like, well, and here's the truth, and we follow the truth, and like what there,
Yeah,
and so
Luther is extremely matter of fact. It is extremely
yeah,
Germanic, where
it just is.
yes.
We fear and love God so, right?
Yeah. And you actually gave me some ideas on the Scots in particular, because as I was thinking about it, the bagpipes and many of these things are actually much more confined to the Highlands. in
Hmm.
terms, and the Highlands were the ones that remained much, much more Celtic. They also remained more Catholic, along with the
Right.
Irish, whereas all the rest of Scotland was far more anglicized. And I think if I would argue that that portion of Scotland is actually their art form, I can say this is scholastic, and it reflects in their
In the
religion.
lowlands.
Yes, in the lowlands,
Yeah.
outside of the Highlands, I would argue
Hume
that
and so on.
yes, it's Hume, it's Carlyle, it's all of it's history, it is philosophy, it is these things are their main expression. It
Yeah.
is exploring these things, and I would argue that all of that is an art. It's a very particular form of art, but it is art nonetheless. And I think that that is where they excel at. That is where they have the greatest of that they have produced. Are
Well, it's fine. You could, uh, I think, right? And I hate to piss off any Scots or frankly even any pure Anglos right now, but it does almost seem like you have these two various traditions or two different, not necessarily opposing, but two different traditions, and man, they slam into each other, and it is like a bottle rocket that just shoots up when you've got this Celtic idea of story and this Anglo willingness to explore and conceptualize, and they're both operating now with this um, individual. See, I don't want to say the focus was individualism, but it kind of was. And so, yeah, when those two come together, it is like rather than them stopping, they both went upward.
That's an
It's kind
interesting way
of
to phrase it. Do you want to explore that a bit more? I think you could definitely hit on it more in depth. I think that you're cooking there.
well, as I'm understanding it, uh, sometimes again when contrasting, not opposing, because if those ideas had been opposing, they would have come in to contact with one another, and nothing would have been accomplished. You see this, you see it frankly with colonialism, right? The Anglos, the Dutch, whomever, they're out there, and it's just time after time. Or that daggum, it's the famous documentary which I've still yet to watch, but it's the Chinese guy trying to work with Africans, and their
Empire of
thoughts are.
Dust. That is one of my
Thank you.
favorite. It is such a good documentary. I would recommend everyone to watch it. It explains so much.
Right, and so you can have it when people groups come together, and their outlook and their thought is so radically different that it's not even tension. It is just two rocks continuing to compress against one another, and nothing. There is no movement, there is no expansion, there's nothing. It's just this forced competition. Whereas seemingly uniquely, because you would look at the Celts, and you would look at the English, and you would be like, boy, these people are very different. They're very different, and they come into contact with one another, and of course there's some friction, whatever, but eventually you reach this point where somehow in there it turns into more of a wedge, and both of the wedge, launch pad, however you want to figure it, and that conflict ends up becoming a springboard that they're able to grab from each group and push into something that ultimately would become a Britain, a member of the UK.
Yeah, no, I'd
So
agree.
not Britain as in TON, but Britain as
I
TAIN.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I think in particular, with the Scottish people, like that focus on scholasticism shows that distinction where they are still a very literary people in that
Mhm.
regard, but it's a very different literary expression. Whereas the English, I would say, have the greatest fictional canon of literally any people in existence. The the Anglo canon is incredible. I mean, you have everything from you have Beowulf that
Well,
produced what?
in fairness, based on everything we've been saying, that's also the one that would resonate the most with you, and
Yes,
that you would naturally interact with and understand the most.
it is, absolutely, but at the same
Yeah.
time, like, that is, I think, very clearly their expression. You know, you have, again, like I was saying, Beowulf, as this
Hmm.
great early literary work, but they continue to follow it up. I mean, Shakespeare, yeah, he it is a play, but it is ultimately written first, and you can read Shakespeare as a book, and it reads just fine. You don't actually need to see the plays. It's clear that the writing of it was the main focus. That also gets into like the different expressions and what is actually the base. But I think the base of Shakespeare's writing. I mean, he altered the language through that. You also have, for example, is it Chaucer? I'm thinking of what is
Canterbury
it?
Tales.
Yes, Canterbury Tales. Yes, Canterbury Tales is incredibly excellent. I love Canterbury Tales. There's just so many more. I mean, C.S. Lewis and Tolkien both come from there.
I was going to say, for all my talk of Germany this and Germany that, if you look at what it is I read, and those authors I highlight, they're all, I think it's all English.
Yes,
I don't
because
know.
yes, they are
Now,
simply the best authors. I mean,
now
they're-
Tolkien is interesting. Maybe I'll treat him like Custer and say he's the honorary German.
I mean, I think that, well, ultimately, like, England does have a relation to Germany. I mean, the
Yeah,
Anglo-Saxons were Germanic tribes. There's a tie
right.
to them. They're derivative of it in the same way that America is derivative of the Anglo. But I mean,
So
again, if I could just a little bit more to hit on just
yeah,
how great their literature is. I mean, Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, like you have so many good authors that come from them. Like it is almost
ooh.
endless.
So actually, here's one I will throw out there though, because I can actually cite some of these too. Russians.
Russians do have a great literature. You're not wrong. Dostoevsky. There's so many different ones, but yes,
So I
War
yeah,
and
and
Peace.
that gets into its own curious thing, because then it's an issue of, is it the Rus? Is it the Asian influence? Is it the European influence? Yeah, so Russia is. I'm not even going to try to go down that road. I just think it's interesting. Huh.
Now, an interesting thing about Russia is they are in a way heavily influenced by Europe, but they are very different from most of the rest of Europe.
Yes.
I don't know enough about Russia, but I think that it is worth at least acknowledging that Russian ballet is
Hmm.
actually one of their focuses and that they're excellent at the same time. You do have the Siberian Orchestra. You have these, they're great at music too. They do have an interesting literature base as well.
Yeah.
I can't say for sure what exactly Russia's main one is. I'm just simply
I
not
think
as
it.
familiar with the Slavs.
Neither am I, but I think your ballet was duly noted. I think that might be.
Yeah, it might. I'm lean towards dance. I'm if you're a Russophile, don't destroy me for it. And because you really love War and Peace, they do have great literature as well. They do have great, again, music as well. They have some great composers. But I do think that it's possible that dance is theirs. I think that dance is also probably Spanish as well. I think that
Okay.
that's Spain's main, and I think that that's why dance resonates so heavily through the South America and Mexico and
Spanish
all these others. I
colonies.
think that,
Yeah.
yes, I think that I would argue that theirs is sort of a degenerated form of dance compared to Spain's.
Yeah.
A little more basal than what Spain. But again,
Yeah. So
the
I
Spain
like
is
this
not
over
Spain.
here.
Yeah.
See in the comments, we've got, along with, so he mentions Tolstoy and Chekhov, but then he also says some great mathematicians and scientists too. That's correct.
Yeah. And all every European group is going to have great mathematicians, scientists, inventors, artists, philosophers. All these things are going to pervade through every group that we're talking about. It's simply what are they at their best at? That is what we're hitting on.
So, and I think yes, and that's the thing, right? What is that country's thrust?
Yes. What is like because they can all hit all of these things, but certain ones are just they're just going to be better at them. And or this is what they are like are this is what is considered the height of what they're capable of.
So here, I think this is a perfect segue into maybe the second half, or however we want to phrase it, of moving into America. So
Yes.
we I think we all have a pretty good idea of what Evola thought of American art and American expression,
I've actually
but
never read Evola, so maybe you could enlighten me on what Evola had to say.
so well, that's funny. Here, monologue for a little bit about um,
What I
I
think
don't know
about
about
Americans.
something. While I see if I can find a quick quote, because I can describe what Evola thought, but I'm wondering if he has a better thought or a
Yeah,
quick.
sure.
Yeah.
So in all of these things, once again, you see these expressions go throughout all of these different groups of people where they do have their own particulars. I do want to hammer in that, you have great ones throughout. One of the ones that we didn't touch on enough, I think, was the Italians. I would argue that Italians, there's a sculpture. They make even their art or like frescoes or all of these things. It's a physical form of art, something that is three
Yes.
dimensional. You see it particularly, Roman busts of their statues. The
Mhm.
height of what they could do to honor an emperor was to build a statue of him. Or you have, for example, the statue of David. It carries on through the Italians. It shows the continuity between these two peoples that they are ultimately the same as the Roman people. They still held to this, whether it was in the Renaissance or whether it was in the Roman era. Both of these groups of people also were amazing at sculpting, amazing at that particular form of art. Um, it is to work with a physical material and to make it into something that is beautiful. It also differs them from, for example, the Chinese or the Native Americans, where they are making art that doesn't actually serve a direct purpose to it, that doesn't have this form. It is simply, we are going to carve this utterly beautiful statue of someone. And it's also interesting that they seem so heavily focused on making something lifelike when they made these things, that it was one to one with reality.
Yeah, and that is a good point because that is, as far as I'm aware, that's a uniquely European portion to try and imitate life
Yes,
in
I would
that
agree.
manner. No embellishment, no storytelling, but just a pure recreation of life.
Yes, and to recreate life in something that is artistic. I mean, I think you see this also with Renaissance painting, where it's all very heavily focused on representing life, but through an art form. The
Hmm.
French as well is one that we
You
didn't.
No, that's it. That's a good point. The one that springs to mind, because I did think about that. The one that springs to mind is culinary, but I don't know if that's entirely fair to the French canon.
Yeah, I mean, they are very culinary. It would be a hard toss up between their food and as well their painting. And I think it also shows that these are both very Mediterranean influenced people because the French also are very they're also great at sculpting. The Italians are also great at food. The French, I think, differ in that they focus more on painting. They had great painters more so than they had great sculptors. Both of these people care very deeply about what food they eat, and how they do their food and making their food rather artistic in how they make it. Um, but I would say that it's quite possible that the French, their basis is not so much food that it is painting as their main art form. That's my view on it.
Fair enough. So, oops, I thought we were on a. Let's do this. Okay. So that should have jumped over to the Evelo, which did. So I'll read this out real quick because it's actually a single quote that's split over two of these frames.
Oh,
The
okay.
Americans, this
Yeah,
is
go ahead.
Julius Evola. The Americans' open mindedness, which is sometimes cited in their favor, is the other side of their interior formlessness. The same goes for their individualism. Individualism and personality are not the same. The one belongs to the formless world of quantity, the other to the world of quality and hierarchy. The Americans are the living refutation of the Cartesian axiom I think, therefore I am. Americans do not think, yet they are. The American mind, puerile and primitive, lacks characteristic form and is therefore open to every kind of standardization.
Well, I would disagree heavily with that myself.
I thought you might.
No, I think we are actually incredibly we have an incredible depth to our thought, and we are not simply just this basal primitive form. I think that's kind of absurd to throw that out, to be honest. I mean, we have our own breadth of incredible philosophers, thinkers, people who care deeply about these things. Again, like I am a massive Thomas Jefferson shill. In
Mm-hmm.
no world would he be considered that. I mean, you're talking about someone who is capable of not only inventing a plow, which was adopted almost universally by farmers simply because he was amazing at geometry. He was also a great lawyer. He can make incredible legal arguments. He made the best argument in favor of our revolution, tying in all of these different things. He was capable of all that. We're also the same people. We
But
went to the
to
moon. We
sure, sure, but I think to give the devil his due, I think everything you're citing is actually Evola would say that that supports his argument and supports his points because I think the argument he would make, and that is thrown at us by our Euro brothers sometimes, is that we are focused on GDP. We are focused on utility. We are focused on maximizing gains. And so when we see Jefferson and when we see his agrarianism, it's less about taking care of the grass for the sake of the grass, but it's more about how do we maximize the output of the soil and how do we make sure that our gains are as high as they can be and that our work is as efficient as it can be.
I would disagree, and I would say that it's more so focused on the yeoman because, in particular, when he did this, he wanted to alleviate the burdens of the farmer, and that
Okay.
plow that I mentioned, he distributed that throughout Europe as well, and he did it entirely at his own cost, and he designed it so that any person could have made this thing. He specifically wrote that even like the most amateurish woodworker could make a plow himself, and I
So
wanted to have it this way.
would it be fair to say then that Evola, from your perspective, he lacks charity?
Yes.
And so what he sees as Jefferson maximizing gains was really Jefferson trying to give the opportunity to any farmer that was willing to jump in and put in the work to be able to uh, bring himself up.
Yes, that is exactly why he did what he did. That's why he did much of what he did. That's what America was fundamentally, I think, formed around and why we have our particular system. Especially originally, it was meant to be where the elite, the upper class, are ultimately servant leaders, where we have this sort of understanding that we have a shared humanity to us, where we do have elites, we do have leaders, but it is this building where we are ultimately working towards, even if we are in these upper positions and we have these things, we want to better Americans. We want to better the lower people. That is what resonates the most with us. America for Americans. Even other ones like Huey Long, Every Man a King, all of these things that we have a resonation where it's like the leaders, the upper class, have this shared identity to them with those who are beneath them. And so we're all going to work towards this. And even if I am in these upper positions and I care about these things, I'm going to resonate with the lower classes. It's something that I see in myself in a lot of ways, where my favorite time that I have is when I'm spending time in like my favorite neighborhoods to hang out in are where it is a prefabricated home, but it's on a foundation. And it's these, backwood, like descendants of the Scots Irish and the backwoods and the border people. I love being around these people. I love spending time with them and interacting with them, even though, I'm someone who's, you can say intellectual. But being around them and working with them and hanging out with them and spending time with them is one of my favorite things. And you will find these people to be ones who are like you show them a modicum of kindness and to where you interact with them in a way that respects that, they will literally like die for you. Like they respect that and they interact with that. Like not too long ago I was in this exact same neighborhood that one of my good friends, who's one of these people, lives in. And we went out to a backyard home built range. We shot some 308 that was at another friend's house. He was like, "Oh yeah, you want to shoot some guns? Yeah, I got plenty of guns. I got plenty of ammo. I reload my own ammo." And we just went out and we shot in his backyard. There was nothing expected of us. He just handed us bullets. He just handed us a gun that was his, and it was like, "You want to go shoot? Let's shoot." And I literally just handed him a $10 bill as just pure respect to like, yes, we shot your ammo, we shot you, gave us these things. Let me give you a little bit of money.
I'm
Just
recognizing
yes,
what
I am
is, yeah,
recognizing that you gave me something. And initially it's like, you don't have to do that. Don't worry about it. I'm like, no, I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give you, I know that this doesn't even cover the cost of the ammo we shot, but it's what I just happen to have a $10 bill on me. Let
right.
me hand it to you. And it was instantly like, you are welcome here anytime. You're a great man. I like you. Because it's that recognition that like I'm going to give to you freely of these things, even though you're, very clearly like we share some level of interaction, but I carry myself as someone who is not of the same quite stock as they are or of the same class, but that simple interaction is like you are, I'm going to recognize you, you're welcome to anything, you're great, we're bonded even from that. And that's a beautiful American interaction of that cutting between classes, of that understanding that we are a part of the same shared people, we are a part of the same shared heritage, and we are going to interact in this way because we have these same shared loves of, firearms and other things which are also very heavily tied into us as a people. um, but it's a beautiful interaction that we have. I think that also speaks to like why we have the issues that we have, is that that's expanded far too much, that it is
Mhm.
far too much of a burden, that it's applied to people that are outside of our people. It's applied to the
Yeah.
entire planet, but when it specifically runs through our own people and it runs through that, and we have these recognitions and works, I think that that is in a lot of regards one of the greatest strengths that America has had, and why we have become so dominant of force, why we were able to expand across an entire continent, why we were able to build the thing we have, is that we have that shared understanding and that shared mutual effort where we recognize that the upper classes rely on the lower classes, that we work to help better our own people. Does all of that make sense?
It does, and as you're saying, and I'm thinking about different variances. I shouldn't even, I wouldn't even necessarily say they're variances. So this is going less to the continental expression, but I think in the U.S. the high Anglo groups did a fairly good job of recognizing that the lower classes of Anglos and those who were less blessed, uh, one, the, hmm, let me figure out how to word this properly. Not that they would be more rustic. That's probably the best way to put it. They would be more rustic, and um, they wouldn't necessarily go to the same heights as other guys were. Having said that, I think when you look at but then the follow on to that is that there is still this form of noblesse oblige within the Anglos for those uh, lower classes. I think lesser men is too strong, too easily confused. But there was a feeling of noblesse oblige in there. That is with the Anglo side. With the German side, the German Midwestern, I think the lines are thinner between the landed class and the peasant class. And so, regardless of where you are as a doctor or writer or whatever, there is this expectation that you are still in and amongst your fellow Midwesterners. And so I think that's one of the differences. And then from my experience, and this is one where I don't want to, Yiz or whomever could correct me and tell me if they think I'm crazy. Somebody from Appalachia could do that, but I do think that's one of the ways in which the Midwestern slash German Americans are interacting more with the Scots Irish and the Appalachian Americans, in that there's less emphasis on the rules per se, but there is still a awareness of and a gratefulness for those men who are higher in the hierarchy. Whereas in the Anglo and the more landed portions of the US, there is very much a more codified and a more understood expression of we are the higher class. Frankly, sometimes, no, never mind. I was going to put my foot in my mouth. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I would say Southerners in particular, because I think we are the most English still, I would argue,
Mm-hmm.
out of all the different groups. We definitely have, there's still a Southern aristocracy that exists. Like you can go to most towns and most places, and there's going to be some family that forever has just owned a large portion of the
Yeah.
land here and or has like some level of elite status still to them on this like very grounded level where like where I'm at, I'm not want to give it in particular, but like there's a
Yeah.
family that owns this particular part of land and they're recognized as this particular family and streets are named after them. This is their area, this is their region. But
Mm-hmm.
however, they're highly respected by again the middle class, lower classes of people because these people also give back to that. There's an understanding
Yeah.
like they give sweetheart deals to different people that are trying to make different endeavors of the land that they own. They will open up their farms and their other things to the public. They will give back to that and share with that. There's a recognition that this is an elite group that we have, but we pay a kind of deference to them because they operate properly and they work with us. I think that definitely characterizes our particular expression in the South. We have still, I would say, a more aristocratic society, a natural aristocracy to us.
Yeah. Well, and I do, and I upset some people. I think there are different portions of the South, and so I think the way in which you interact with and experience the South in Kentucky and the majority of Tennessee, well, in Appalachia versus Alabama
Yeah,
or
it's going to be very
portions of
different too
Mississippi.
on
It's
mine or North Carolina, Virginia, South Carolina. They're all very
uh,
different. Um,
very different. Yeah, and so it is. Yeah, I think Anglo's experience it differently than Scots Irish. Even it's not as pronounced in the Midwest, but German Midwest can be different from English Midwest, and all of the Midwest is certainly different than New England.
no, I would absolutely agree with that. Do we want
So,
to, by the way, get into what America's art is?
so that's exactly where I was going to head and say, we've talked a lot about America and the people groups that are making up America, but does America have a thrust?
Yes,
Does
and
it have an
I would
art?
argue that the main basis is actually still literary, as derived from the Anglo.
Okay.
I think that we do have like a very solid literary expression. Cormac
Hmm.
McCarthy is one of the easiest examples of the works he makes are beautiful. I think that we've dominated in film, but if you look at films, even many of them
Now,
are.
would you call film its own category, or would you just say it's an evolution of that literary?
I would argue that our film is an evolution, and I think that films
Okay.
depend on who they come from. So, like, if you look at like French
Hmm.
film, it's very focused on the colors, the what is actually depicted on the screen and the imagery. So there's a still, it's derivative of their painting background, I would argue.
Sure.
I think that like Italian film is probably much more focused on like what is actually depicted on screen in those particulars. Um, American, I think, is the easiest because of how much we have that's simply adaptations of books. I think that that's still our most base form. However, I think part of the reason why we excel so much at film is that we have, I would argue that if, to define American in like the easiest form, in the same way that Aristotle might have said that human is, a biped with, no feathers or whatever exactly he said, is that Americans are Anglo-European at this point. That is, we have an Anglo basis to us, but we are a derivative of most of Europe at this point. It might have been different earlier on, but for the most part, I would say that Germans and these other groups have integrated enough to where they are American. They are a part of it. They have different regional aspects to them,
Yeah.
but every nation does. A
Well, and
Bavarian
you,
isn't Prussian, but they're
yes,
both Germans. It's the same way where you could say a Midwesterner is not a Southerner, but we're both Americans. I would
yes.
still say that we are Anglo-European, that it is colorized by that. There's a reason why we all were speaking English. There's a reason why we are under that
And
base.
so I think I could get away with. I think I could get away with. So you could say we are Anglo people, and I would say we are Germanic people.
Okay. Well, I
Which
mean,
I think it's technically true, and I'm
the
just using
Anglos
it to be
are
an
a
ass.
Germanic, yeah, the Anglos are a
Exactly.
Germanic people.
It's,
English is a Germanic language. Like I can speak a bit of German, and like some of the most base words are near identical in German to English. Like for example, like bread is brosch, milk is milch. Like all of these like very basic words are very clearly German
right.
derivative. And so yeah, we're a Germanic people, but if you wanted to be more particular, we are Anglo. And Anglos are
And I
different
think
enough from
well, it's certainly that is how. I don't think you can get away from the fact that that's how America started, and we're going to get back to art, but this is kind of something I've been working through lately. Um, North America, North America, roughly had Spanish, French, and I'm going to say this wrong because I always get it wrong, but I'm just going to say Dutch, and I'm going to keep running with Dutch for a
yeah.
minute. So you've got all of these guys, and at the end of the day, it was the Anglo's that won out. That got before we even get to the tribal nations that were operating here. We've got this European issue, and it was the Anglo's that won out. And so uh, when you get to America, this is an Anglo issue. We've already dealt with the Spanish, we've already dealt with the French, we've already dealt with the Danes. And I don't understand how you can get anywhere other than that. Now I have run into um, German Americans who say no, no, no. There's been such a change, especially post Civil War, which I think is one overstepping the effect, but then two isn't acknowledging the Anglo base that has formed not only the narrative but also the actual history of America and the way its legal systems operate.
Well, the
Uh,
easiest is what language are we speaking right now?
sure, sure. Well, and to some degree, that did come by hook and crook. We did
Yeah.
have German internment camps and Italian internment camps, and there was a submission that ultimately had to occur. Uh, hmm. Yeah, I guess that's for another stream. But regardless, yeah, we're speaking English, and if you deviate from that, particularly as a foundation, I don't know. Actually, I'll just say from my perspective, you don't have an understanding of what America was. And if you don't have an understanding of what America was, it's very difficult to come to an understanding of what America is.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement. This is why I focus so heavily on, you know, antebellum history and history of America and the Revolution, because I want people to understand what we were, or pre-revolution history. I want us to
Right.
understand this is the basis. We haven't actually deviated that far from the basis. It hasn't been erased. It still colorizes a lot of things. It's even where some of the problems arrive from. I think the post liberals overstep it heavily, but I think that there is something to be said of where this is where we come from. This is how we think. This is how we operate. This is what our narrative is. You still have to generally be in line with it. You can still utilize it, and you don't have to. I don't even think it's possible to uproot the entire thing. I think you're always going to have that as the basis.
Or at the very least, there's going to be tension, and that's why we have such an issue with with different people groups committing very intense crimes. I don't know what I can't say on YouTube, but they participate in and they commit very extreme crimes, and then the cultural expectation is that there will be some form of justice. Now we are getting to the point where that is sidestepped far too often through means of incompetence or whatever. Was that clear as mud? Again,
No,
that had to make
I
that
think
one a
you're
little
pretty
bit
clear on that.
hazy.
No, I think you're pretty clear.
Yeah.
It's also like crimes that are committed by an outside group that happens to live in you, with you, are
Mhm.
always going to hit more because
Yeah, they're
you
going to
have
grate and irritate on you.
yes, because it's like you were invited into this place and you did these things that you violated our compacts. It's obviously going to hit more.
Yes. Well, and I think that the peasant's way of putting it is probably the perfect way of putting it. That's not what we do here. We don't
Yes,
do that.
exactly. But to get more, especially like I think that that Anglo-European nature is also why we excel so much at film, because film,
Okay.
though much of our stuff is a literary basis, but film is a bringing together of all of these different art forms where it's visual, it has writing to it, it's a play, there's all of these things that go on with it. But I think the fact that we've, done so well with film is because we have sort of this Anglo-European basis where we can have a story to base it off of, but you're going to have music, you're going to have visuals to it, you're going to have all of these things, and I think that that's that resonation of this, Anglo basis, but you have all of these different European groups that then come together to then make a thing, and I think it's an expression of that, if that makes sense.
All right. So, if I remember what you were saying earlier, the thrust for America is literature. Yes.
Yes. Yes, I would
Okay.
argue that the thrust of America is still literature.
And then is it fair to express your position as, and within the world of film, the Americans still do it they do it the best out of the world. So it's not that film is the thrust of American art, but Americans do it the best. Is that fair?
Yeah, and ultimately that
Okay.
film is derivative of
Of the
literature in
literary
the same
okay.
way that the Japanese would also, most people think anime as
Mhm.
theirs. However, their anime is derivative of their literature. I think that that's
Yeah.
in a
Okay.
similar basis to us, where yeah, if you look at most film adaptations, a lot of them are going to come from books first. And we have plenty of great writers. You know, Herman
I
Melville is
wonder.
just one example.
I really do wonder. You mentioned it. I don't know if it was in passing or if we just didn't build on it, but that idea of the Japanese being on an island, the Anglos, the English coming from an island. I do wonder if it's that, if there is some degree of always the horizon.
Yeah, I mean, it's
And
certainly
I
possible, but
don't know. I'm just, yeah.
yeah, I'm curious why it seems that island peoples tend to resonate with literature more. It definitely seems to be something that I see a pattern of, um, at least the very developed. Because I don't think like Samoans
Well,
are
that's so.
great.
That's actually exactly where my mind was. I was like, are you aware of Maori literature or Samoans
No, I
or
don't think that they're literary people as far as I'm aware. I can't say I'm even remotely an
yeah?
expert on either of those groups of people.
Okay.
If I had to say anything, it seems like tattoos are their are their expression. If I had to just shoot something off in the dark. Um,
Yeah. That I mean that is interesting. Huh.
but at least for these, what I would argue are more, I would say high cultures, very civilized people, like it's hard to denigrate the Japanese, for example, as not being such. Like they are very civilized people, and are very intelligent. As long and so I think that it is interesting that these island peoples have that.
So yes, but I will tell you the Japanese, to me as well, as someone who is relatively ignorant of Japanese people, I I find it, schizophrenic is too strong, but it's whatever. It's an easy way to say it. I find it seemingly schizophrenic that we can go from, man, these amazing heights of honor and courage and sacrifice on behalf of your nation to putting glass in a GI's urethra so you can smash it during World War II.
Yeah, no, they were extremely brutal during World War II. You
That unit seven, what is it, 736
731,
or
yeah, 731.
730? Yeah, right. Yeah,
But yes,
the grape of Nanking.
yeah,
It's a very curious people.
yes, I would agree. I think part of it is that they reserve that very specifically to their own people, and they can often see the outside people as not even human beings.
As another. Yeah.
Yeah, as a
So
total other.
I will say, in my background, I've got people uh,
At the same time, if I could
married to.
say,
Go,
they
yeah,
are quite interesting in that regard because they went from, like you said, being utterly, like, horrifically brutal to American POWs, to the Chinese, to all these different groups. But when they were defeated, they actually even still have a great love for MacArthur, which is very
that's where
cool.
I was headed,
Yeah.
because that was also something that, growing up, being exposed to different Japanese people, being exposed to American GIs and Japanese wives, and even Japanese members of the U.S. military. It did seem almost like, and some of them would say this explicitly. Once once we were beaten, we knew that you were like us.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I think that there's certainly some truth to that. I think you even see that initially when they had the Meiji Restoration, and they westernized very heavily. There was a recognition, even from like Admiral Perry sparking this, where it's like, oh shoot, these people are actually kind of superior to us, and there's this kind of deference to that that then builds them up, and then they got a little bit, I would say, high on their britches and thought that they were now better, and then they needed to be beaten down again to realize, okay, actually they are there. But like I think like they're generally fairly respectful towards Western people and towards Europeans, and
Yeah.
there's a recognition that, oh, these are great people. However, they are supremely racist to just about every
Yes.
single other group that is not Europeans. Like they
Yes.
don't really like they will they're just not very
Well, including other East Asians, because it
yes,
wasn't the Koreans that beat them, it
yeah.
wasn't the Chinese that beat them, it was the Americans.
No, like they think of Koreans as these completely
Filth.
emotionally driven feminine people. They think of the Chinese as utterly, they would probably call them soulless bug people. But there's a
Yes.
recognition that Americans and Europeans are like, we would consider you an equal to us.
Yeah.
Like they're very fascinating in that regard, especially in how like forgiving many of them are towards or like that recognition that, yeah, you guys beat us, we can
Yeah.
recognize that you're there's something to you people even because you beat us. um they're very fascinating people because they're not Europeans, they're not white peoples, they are their own group, but they are still very intelligent and very interesting in terms of like how they
Yeah.
view the world,
To
more so than
to
I find
have
the Chinese to be, or other East Asians. Though
right.
I can recognize that the Koreans and the Chinese are also, relatively intelligent, competitive groups of people.
Yeah. Yes. There is a there is still a uniquely Eastern Asian identity there, and there's a uniquely Chinese and uniquely Korean in comparison to the Japanese. And there is something, there are qualities to the East Asian as well as individual countries, to that culture and civilization for sure. As Europeans and as Americans, we can recognize that. So I before we close this up, for the keen listener, as we've been talking about art and as we've been talking about what the various what the various states and nations are producing, there has been also a particular nomadic group that has found themselves within the halls of art throughout the world and through a lot of these places we're talking about. Perhaps even they would claim not only superiority, but they would claim the overwhelming majority of production within the various arts, especially in Europe and now in America. Do you have any clue what group I'm talking about?
Yeah, you're talking about gypsies, right? That's a nomadic group of people.
Yes, yes, exactly. The Romanis, the Indians. Um, no, so I'm talking about Semites. I'm talking in
Fair.
particular of the Jewish people, and I'm curious to know uh, from do you have a particular perspective on how they fit in, on how they have influenced art within Europe and America?
Yeah,
And
I would also say that they also, I believe, are a literary people.
okay,
And I think that you can also see this on they're fast. I mean, like they care very much about the Talmud. They care very much about all these other things. They have written books. They have done a lot. They've done a lot with Hollywood and with film, and I think that's part of why they do so well is because it does have a literary basis to it. I would also argue that that's part of why um, Anglos tend to um, have them there more than other groups, if that makes sense, because there
ooh,
is sort
dig
of that
into that.
similarity. Yeah. I'm trying to do my best on this, but it seems like they're like the Anglos are the least likely to expel them or remove them. Um,
Okay,
uh, they tend to find the biggest refuge within Anglo society, and I think that part of that might be because there is that shared form of art that we have,
this
that
is
there is some
really I.
resonation there.
Are you aware of how big this idea is? I mean, even as you're saying it, I'm like, oh, this is a
I
big framework, a big idea.
it is a very big idea, but I think that there is some truth to that. I don't know of anyone else who has expressed that. Um, But certainly it
Very
does get
interesting.
very heavily like the Anglo is just like the European Jew, and other things along those lines do get said by continentals quite often, or there is this accusation of the Anglo
Okay.
Empire being a Jewish empire, or of these ties that the two have, or of
Well,
America
Balfour and
itself.
everything else. So
Yes, and of America and everything else. I think that there is something to be said of where there is something of a similarity there where we both do like, the literary art, we do resonate with that, and so there might be a degree of tolerance
that's
that is given more so because of that.
okay. Yeah. So because, well, not necessarily because, but
Or it ties
in
into it. It's
recognition,
it's it's it's
yeah,
a
yeah,
it's a similarity.
there's a there's a recognition of the narrative and of the ability to express the narrative, the cultural identity. Uh, yeah, and just being able to do that, boy, that is an interesting thought because that's basically what we've already been saying about the Japanese and the Americans. Yes, there is that idea of, well, we kind of beat them, but in having done that, then there is a recognition of how our art styles are similar and how they affect our nations in like manner. So I don't know. I'm halfway blown away right now, and I'm stumbling over my words to think of how it is. Yeah, that the Jewish people and that the Anglo people in particular were interacting. It's an interesting hypothesis, if nothing else.
No, certainly, and it's something that I have not done enough study on. However, I would say that that is the case. Um, I know that much
Okay,
at least. Like it does seem like that, like again, like Jewish people tend to resonate more
I
with
would.
literature, publication of it, the
Yeah.
uh, yeah, and the push of that. And I would argue so do Anglo people, so do American people. And this is also where they have, I would say, found the most refuge in, or the most
Okay.
tolerance from, are from these particular groups of people. I think that there's certainly something there to explore, or why that is, or why that happens.
Well, it is. It is. I'm sitting here thinking. I'm like, yeah, but I don't know any Jewish authors. But that's not true. Dagum, what Peter S. Beagle, the guy that wrote that last Unicorn, or who's the Dagum one? I mean, Larry. Anyway, I'm thinking Seinfeld and everything else. No, I do know of Jewish writers.
Yeah, no, I'm certain
Off
there are a lot of
it,
Jewish authors.
and it's just I didn't recognize it off the top of my head. Oh, but duh, Rambo Van Halen is a Jewish author.
Or Kafka
Uh huh.
is just one
That
example.
would be. I would be. I would be curious to hear to hear you throw this in front of Rambo and see what he thought.
It would certainly be interesting. But no, I
Yeah.
think that literature in particular is where they find themselves at. It's not even always, um, fiction. I mean, like Eli Weasel's Night and other things like that. It does seem like literature does tend to be there. It might not even always be fiction literature, but they do
Sure.
tend to write quite. I mean, they make up a lot of
The New
journalists.
Yorker, the Atlantic. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. I said they make up a lot of journalists.
Yeah, absolutely. That No, I find that very interesting. Well, and there arguably, right? I'm going out here, but I wonder too if you can, as you start chasing these threads, you move into English law and lawyers, and certainly there are English lawyers and there are Jewish lawyers, and in this question of, huh? No, I think that is an interesting idea.
No, I think so too. I think that there's certainly something there, and that if you can explore that more, I think that could answer a lot of questions.
A literary people.
Yeah. And I think literary peoples are, in particular, like these art forms and these expressions do speak to the character of a group of people and how they are. I do think
Well,
that
that's
there is some truth to that.
yeah. I mean, that's Spielberg, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Is
yeah, there's a lot of Jewish directors, and they were certainly able to get these things through, or again, screenwriters or other things.
well, and the fact that it was a focus. Because let me in the world of art, let me kind of take a dump on Americans of German extraction. we we came over and we farmed. I mean that. What else did we do? I mean, granted, when I say we farmed, we had town squares and we liked hanging out with each other and we built pubs and all that. But uh, by and large, there isn't outside of Milwaukee in
You made
Chicago.
beer. You were great
Well,
brewers.
right. I'm trying to think though of a Midwestern arts town, and there's an art scene in all of them, but the art scene in Cleveland, the art scene in Chicago, the art scene in Milwaukee, none of those that I could think of are particularly German. Certainly not in Detroit. Yeah, and so it would seem that no, I think it's I'm gobsmacked at the moment because I'm just thinking that there's a reason different groups do what they do when they come to the states, whether they stay in the because I don't to put my cards on the table too. I don't buy completely into the argument that people came over here and did what money allowed. That there's no way that's true because you're going to tell me that somehow money is what allowed the Germans to go up into the Midwest and start farms. Money is the reason that the Scots Irish are in the Daggum Mountains, the same as they were back in the UK, and that the Anglos went to the lowlands. And like, no, there is something about these environments and these temperatures and climates that is attracting these people the same way that there is something about what these people as a culture have been into prior to coming to North America, that they replicated those cultures. And what I'm saying is as simple as when you get enough Indians in Texas, what do? They build a statue to whatever Hindu god.
Yeah, absolutely. Or they'll run scams just like they ran back home.
And so it isn't, well, just to hit on that, man, every time I have to think about Vivek Ramaswamy
Oh.
running for Ohio governor and having stood on a Texas podium in a daggum Texas shirt, man,
It
that
is the
guy,
most, yeah, and the Stetson and everything else. It is
right?
absurd. Yeah,
There's nothing sincere about that. There is nothing. Yeah.
I
Anyways,
would I would argue they're a very insincere people.
yeah. Well, it's that's fair. Yeah, but no, this Jewish thing, you got me thinking. I like it.
Uh,
I like it. Very good. Well, so have we missed anything in your argument and as you were forming it and trying to put it together?
no, I think we covered just about everything. I mean, I think I hit most of the major European groups and where their particular artistic expressions are. There's certainly ones that leave have room left to explore. But this is a very fascinating topic that I don't think very many people get into or use or understand the depths of where there's something to this. And I'm glad to have come on this because I'm working on an article on this, and you were very helpful for just helping me to get my thoughts out on this to where I can maybe get something that's more coherent, because I think that it does say a lot. And when you understand these things, it helps you to understand different particular people groups. And as you understand the differences between other groups, you understand your own group.
Yeah, well, and for me, I like I like the this is when I get really gay, but I like the I like the positivity of this, right? I like
Yeah.
the sort of the charitable aspect of this of saying who are these people and what do they produce? It's just it's fun. Rather, HBD is a thing, right? Human biodiversity is a thing, and we can focus on the natives, and at times we need to. That's part of our responsibility to our fellow man. We need to be aware that if you import the third world, you become the third world, and there are steps that have to be taken in the future. And when everything is in its right and proper order, and people are where they're supposed to be, and we have the various separations as needed, it's pretty cool to recognize that there is a particular artistic thrust by the individual people groups throughout the world, and that there are things that they uh, that help better display who they are as creatures.
No, I
I
agree. I
think that's
mean,
cool.
no, I think so too. I mean, like, there is a reason why God made many nations of people and why he did not
Yeah.
make them all exactly the same, why we have these different particular expressions. There's a beauty, like, again, to avoid sounding gay, there's a beauty to diversity, but it's a diversity that is best appreciated when they're in their proper places. And you can
Yes.
simply just visit them or see these things, and not when you try and amalgamate everything together.
To use an agricultural saying, good fences make good neighbors.
They do. Yes, they do. And then you can appreciate your neighbor's farm and how it differs from your
Yeah.
own farm when it's not running over and you don't have to dispute whose crops are whose. And if they don't try to claim that your farm is actually their farm.
Very true. Very true. So the last thing I'll say too is I recognize the one that really caught me off guard was Slavic art, and I think the reason that caught, even though I'm more ignorant of Arabic art or South American, even though I'm more ignorant of that, the one that really caught me off guard was Slavic art because I know it's there
Yes, but and the
and I
problem
don't.
is yeah, I don't know which one is their particular one. Like, there is certainly one, but again, they have a great literary expression. They have a great, dance culture of ballet. They excel at that. They're decent
Right.
composers too. It's hard to say what their particular form is.
Shostakovich
Yeah,
was okay. Very
it's
interesting.
Yeah, no, it is really hard. I think I'm the most I don't have any Slavic blood. My entire bloodline is as far away from Russia as it gets.
Yeah.
I've never really studied them all too much in depth. So I simply just can't answer that in particular um, with those people. But it would be worth talking to a Slav who is intelligent and seeing what they thought of this.
I'm sure we've got somebody somewhere. Try and track
Certainly.
them down, get somebody on here.
Yeah. But I think that this is a very fascinating subject. I'm very glad that you were willing to entertain me on this. I think this helped a lot for fleshing out this particular idea that is not fully complete, that I'm certain that there are some errors on or things that could be updated. But no, you're one of my favorite people to talk to about things like this because I think that you have, yeah, no, you really are. This is my favorite show to come on by
I
far.
appreciate it.
Yeah, just because of that. Like you have, I think we resonate in this particular manner because I don't think either of us we like to just explore things and work things out for ourselves rather than just take on like, here's this thinker or here's this author and
Yeah.
I'm just going to be a disciple of this particular guy. I think both of us want to actually like do the work ourselves and come to conclusions, and I think that a lot of the things we come to are similar, but also you have perspectives that differ from mine. And so it's very
Mhm.
useful for fleshing out my own.
Hey, that works. No. So while we're here patting each other on the back, I appreciate you coming on. It's always fun.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to be
Yeah.
on.
All right. Well, gentlemen, I think that's a great place to end it. Kaiser, is there anything you need to anything that's worth shilling right now? You're obviously working on this article. You got anything else going on?
I'm also working on a new, or I guess you could call it like media project. That's a collective group between many of the different patriots that I have been able to interact with through my time online, called Patriot Dispatches. We've got our first article out. We've got some
Okay.
edits up. It's a very exciting project that I think a lot is going to come out of through this, of this just collaborative work on people who are very invested in America in particular and exploring this and to uphold America itself as something to be defended, who support this, who are also more on our level. And I think that that's a worthwhile endeavor. I'm hoping that it continues to see success. And I'm very happy to be a part of it with some amazing writers and great thinkers are attached to it. And I think we can make it into something very solid.
Now, is there a particular URL for that, or would maybe the best place be to start with the Nathaniel Green stream last night?
Oh, yeah, we talked about it on the Nathaniel Green stream last night, but we also have a Twitter, a Substack. More will come out as well as we develop this, but yeah, it's an exciting project. I would certainly check it out. What is a patriot is our first article, and it's certainly worth a read.
All right, very good. Well, as always, it's been a pleasure, gentlemen. You guys have a good evening, and we're gonna sign off for. Bleh, can't even talk, but sign off for now. Have a good evening.
Good night.